How do farmers keep animals from eating their crops?
Farmers keep animals away from their crops in a number of ways. Birds are probably the biggest wildlife pests because they feed on seeds before they have a chance to grow. And they eat developing food plants. Because loud noises and the presence of predators and people frighten birds. Farmers have used things like scarecrows and models of bird predators, like hawks hung from poles or trees to try to keep hungry creatures away. Devices called bird scarers, which make repeated, loud, shotgun-like bangs, are also used. But before scarers were invented, it was usually the job of farm children to stand in fields, in all kinds of weather, using wooden clappers, rattles, and other noisemakers to keep birds away from crops. Other crop enemies in the animal world are insects. Sometimes insect damage can be controlled by introducing beneficial insects that eat the bugs causing the problem. But generally farmers take stronger measures, like spraying chemical insecticides that poison the pests. Sprayers pulled by tractors are usually used, though airplanes. Crop dusters can spray a large field very quickly.
How do farmers keep animals from eating their crops?
Farmers keep animals away from their crops in a number of ways. Birds are probably the biggest wildlife pests because they feed on seeds before they have a chance to grow. And they eat developing food plants. Because loud noises and the presence of predators and people frighten birds. Farmers have used things like scarecrows and models of bird predators, like hawks hung from poles or trees to try to keep hungry creatures away. Devices called bird scarers, which make repeated, loud, shotgun-like bangs, are also used. But before scarers were invented, it was usually the job of farm children to stand in fields, in all kinds of weather, using wooden clappers, rattles, and other noisemakers to keep birds away from crops. Other crop enemies in the animal world are insects. Sometimes insect damage can be controlled by introducing beneficial insects that eat the bugs causing the problem. But generally farmers take stronger measures, like spraying chemical insecticides that poison the pests. Sprayers pulled by tractors are usually used, though airplanes. Crop dusters can spray a large field very quickly.
What are barns used for?
Today, the huge, airy farm structures we know as barns are used mostly to store modern farm machinery and house farm animals. But before modern farming, they had a greater number of important uses. Before the invention of threshing machines, which separate cereal grains like wheat from their stalks, the grain harvest had to be stored in barns. where it would await threshing or pounding by hand during winter months. The structures had to be large and drafty for the process of winnowing, which separated straw dust from the grains after threshing. Before farmers began to raise special crops to feed their livestock during the winter, they used hay, which is dried grass, grown wild or taken from the stalks of cereal crops. Huge amounts enough to last several months had to be stored away. Hay was usually kept in barn lofts located above the main floor, where farm animals spent the winter. This high storage place allowed air to circulate around the hay, keeping it from rotting. It was convenient, too, because hay could be pulled down as needed to feed the livestock. Because farmers had to store their harvest crops in barns, they wisely cut entrance holes near their roofs, inviting barn owls to make nests there. The birds would hunt the rats and mice that liked to feed on the grain.
What are barns used for?
Today, the huge, airy farm structures we know as barns are used mostly to store modern farm machinery and house farm animals. But before modern farming, they had a greater number of important uses. Before the invention of threshing machines, which separate cereal grains like wheat from their stalks, the grain harvest had to be stored in barns, where it would await threshing or pounding by hand during winter months. The structures had to be large and drafty for the process of winnowing, which separated straw dust from the grains after threshing. Before farmers began to raise special crops to feed their livestock during the winter, they used hay, which is dried grass, grown wild or taken from the stalks of cereal crops. Huge amounts enough to last several months had to be stored away. Hay was usually kept in barn lofts located above the main floor, where farm animals spent the winter. This high storage place allowed air to circulate around the hay, keeping it from rotting. It was convenient, too, because hay could be pulled down as needed to feed the livestock. Because farmers had to store their harvest crops in barns, they wisely cut entrance holes near their roofs, inviting barn owls to make nests there. The birds would hunt the rats and mice that liked to feed on the grain.
Which language is the most widely spoken?
It is not surprising that Chinese the language spoken in the world's most populous country is the world's most widely spoken language. Although many different versions or dialects of Chinese are spoken in the country, the standard or official language Mandarin Chinese is spoken in its northern and central regions. It is the native language of nearly 900 million people. Spanish is the second most widely spoken language, and English is third. English is the most common international language, spoken in more places around the world than any other.
What is organic farming?
While most large farms today use chemicals to control weeds and insects and to produce increased amounts of vegetables, milk, or eggs, some farmers have chosen to run their farms without chemicals. Organic farmers believe that the chemicals many farmers use can be damaging to the environment and to the people that eat the food grown on such farms. They feel that natural fertilizers and pest control methods are just as effective and far healthier. A British farmer and scientist named Albert Howard began the practice of organic farming as an alternative to modern chemical-based methods in the 1930s. His ideas have spread all over the world, taking hold in the United States in the late 1940s. A basic principle of organic farming is to focus on keeping the soil rich with nutrients by feeding it natural fertilizers like cow manure. Such fertile soil can help create stronger plants that are better able to resist disease and insects. Organic farmers also prevent insect damage by putting up insect traps or by bringing in beneficial insects that feed on the harmful ones that are causing the problem. In extreme cases, they need to use pesticides, but to continue being certified as organic farmers in the United States, such farmers need to use botanical pesticides. Those that are made from plants, rather than synthetic, or man-made, chemicals. Organic farmers also try to do more tasks using human power rather than gas-powered vehicles, thereby using less fuel and cutting down on pollution. Organic farms that raise livestock like dairy cows or chickens feed the animals with natural food, avoiding chemicals and growth hormones that make cows produce more milk and chickens produce more eggs. Some organic farmers also allow their animals to roam in a large area. Such animals are described as free-range. Rather than keeping them in small, climate-controlled pens for their entire lives. While organic farming began in a small way in experimental gardens and small family-run farms, it has grown into a huge industry. As more and more people looked for organically grown fruits and vegetables in their grocery stores, more and more companies began producing certified organic foods. At the beginning of the 21st century, organic farming was a $7.70 billion per year industry in the United States, a small but significant percentage of the entire food selling industry.
Which country is the smallest?
The smallest country in the world is Vatican City. It is located on 108.7 acres, or 44 hectares, which is not even half a square mile, in the city of Rome, Italy. Vatican City is where the central government of the Roman Catholic Church is located. The home of the Pope, who is leader of the Church, is also located there. About 850 people are citizens of Vatican City, which is ruled by the Pope, though a governor and a council actually run it. Vatican City has its own money, postage stamps, flag, and diplomatic corps. Monaco, which is less than 1 square mile, around 2 square kilometers in area, is the second smallest country in the world.
What is wind chill?
Wind chill describes the chilling effect that moving air or wind has on the way we feel different temperatures and on the way our bodies react to them. 2 days with the same outdoor temperature will seem quite different if one is very windy and one is not. Because the wind carries heat away from the surface of our bodies, making us feel colder. This effect is called the wind chill factor. A wind chill index or chart has been developed that shows how certain wind speeds or velocities make different temperatures feel. In very cold climates it is important to know the wind chill. It tells people who live there how to dress to protect their skin from frostbite, a freezing of the skin that can cause permanent damage.
Why is it so noisy in big cities?
Big cities are so noisy because a lot of people and activities are confined to a relatively small space. Think about the activities that happen in a small neighborhood: people talking, car motors running, ambulance sirens blaring, and multiply that several times over. Because cities are usually centers of manufacturing, business, government, and culture, they attract large numbers of people who live and work there. Cities are also home to lots of cars and mass transportation vehicles like buses and trains, all of which produce tremendous noise. And noises in a city often seem louder because the sound waves bounce back and forth between the many tall buildings.
What is the hottest temperature ever recorded on Earth?
The hottest temperature ever recorded on Earth was in the desert settlement of Al-Aziziyat, Libya, located in North Africa. On September 13, 1922. That day the temperature reached 136 degrees Fahrenheit, 58 degrees Celsius.
What is thunder?
Thunder is the sound made by the gases in the air around lightning, which are quickly heated and expand when a strike occurs. Put simply, thunder is the sound of hot air exploding. Loud thunder may seem frightening, but it is totally harmless.
Why are there parking meters?
Finding a place to park in a big city is usually a problem because land space is so limited. In fact, One of the reasons that most big cities have mass transportation systems is because they don't have enough space for all the people who live, work, and visit there to use and park cars. Parking meters first used in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. In 1935 were invented to help solve the traffic and parking problems of big cities. By charging drivers for parking spaces and limiting their time there. Parking meters encourage people to leave more quickly, which allows other drivers to use the spaces. The devices also encourage people to use public transportation to and from and within a city because parking is so expensive. This, in turn, reduces the number of cars on city streets, cutting down on traffic, noise, and pollution. Another benefit of parking meters is that the money they bring in can be used for city needs.
Why does high humidity make a day feel warmer?
Just as the wind affects how we feel and how our bodies react to cold temperatures. Humidity, or moisture in the air, affects how we feel and react to warm temperatures. High humidity slows down the evaporation of perspiration, or sweat, which our bodies produce to cool off. So 2 days with the same outdoor temperature will seem quite different if the humidities vary. With the high humidity day feeling warmer. The heat index is a chart developed to show how different levels of humidity make various temperatures feel to us, and how our bodies will react. The heat index is important to know because serious health conditions like heat exhaustion and heat stroke can occur on very hot, muggy days if care is not taken.
How does money circulate?
After new money is printed at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, the United States Treasury Department ships it to the 12 Federal Reserve banks that are spread throughout the country. The reserve banks then distribute the cash to commercial banks and other institutions where people keep their money. Customers withdraw cash from banks and spend it on gas, food, books, and so on. Eventually the stores deposit the bills back at the bank, and the process begins again.
What are barns used for?
Today, the huge, airy farm structures we know as barns are used mostly to store modern farm machinery and house farm animals. But before modern farming, they had a greater number of important uses. Before the invention of threshing machines, which separate cereal grains like wheat from their stalks, the grain harvest had to be stored in barns, where it would await threshing or pounding by hand during winter months. The structures had to be large and drafty for the process of winnowing, which separated straw dust from the grains after threshing. Before farmers began to raise special crops to feed their livestock during the winter, They used hay, which is dried grass, grown wild or taken from the stalks of cereal crops. Huge amounts enough to last several months had to be stored away. Hay was usually kept in barn lofts located above the main floor, where farm animals spent the winter. This high storage place allowed air to circulate around the hay, keeping it from rotting. It was convenient, too, because hay could be pulled down as needed to feed the livestock. Because farmers had to store their harvest crops in barns, they wisely cut entrance holes near their roofs, inviting barn owls to make nests there. The birds would hunt the rats and mice that liked to feed on the grain.
Why do people speak different languages?
While some animals have demonstrated the ability to communicate with other animals and with humans, people are the only creatures on Earth who communicate through language, which is a system of vocal symbols. Scientists don't know exactly when humans first spoke, though they know that it happened a very long time ago, in prehistoric times. Different languages arose when groups of people separated by things like deserts, mountains, or great oceans developed their own systems of communicating that reflected their unique ways of life. These new languages were passed on when children learned to speak the same way the people around them did. As groups of people spread out to settle different parts of the world, they took their languages with them. They began to pronounce some words differently as time passed and had to add words to describe the new things and situations they found in distant lands. Languages gradually changed from their parent languages, though they still shared some characteristics. Today, English and French are languages that seem very different from one another. But they came from the same parent language, Indo-European, a long time ago. All languages that share a parent language belong to the same family. There are 13 large language families in the world today, from which most languages have descended.
Where does our food come from?
People in industrialized nations like the United States eat food that comes from all over the world. Such countries have the wealth to buy food products that are brought by plane or ship from far away. A wide variety of canned and packaged foods are available from every corner of the globe. And even fresh foods like fruits, vegetables, fish, and meats can now be sped across oceans in refrigerated boats. So foods that were once rare treats are now available at nearly every time of the year. Arriving from places with different climates and seasons. That means that the asparagus and strawberries you eat may be grown nearby or halfway across the world. Today, when you look in your cupboards, it is like taking a trip around the world. You will see tea from India, coffee from Brazil, olive oil from Italy, and much more. In the past, people ate only the food that they could produce on their farms or find at their local markets. That is still true of many people who live in developing nations.
Why do we use money?
We use money as payment for goods or services. Today people use coins, banknotes, bills, checks, credit cards, and debit cards. The cards used at automatic teller machines, or ATMs, to pay for things. Before money was invented, you could only get something from another person by bartering or trading something else for it. It was hard to make even trades and the deal had to be made on the spot. The introduction of money offered people greater flexibility when trying to get goods or services. It made it possible to put standard values on things, and money could be saved and used for future purchases. A great variety of objects have served as money for different people around the world. Anything considered valuable by a group and important to its way of life can be used as money. Shells and feathers, furs and cloth, salt and cattle have all been used at one time or another as money, setting the standard by which the value of all other things were measured. From earliest times, precious metals like gold and silver were used as money because they were durable. Materials that could be easily handled and divided, and they were considered valuable by many groups of people. Carefully weighed amounts of these metals were used as money. A practice that led to the invention of coins in the 7th century BC in the kingdom of Lydia, what is now Turkey. Early metal coins were stamped with designs that showed their weight and value, similar to the coins we use today. Money bills or banknotes came into use around the 10th century in China. Because Chinese coins were so heavy, people started to leave them with merchants, who gave them written receipts that were sometimes used to buy things. The Chinese government soon took over the job of printing receipts that people could use as money. While they are just pieces of paper and not valuable themselves, banknotes became money because they represented valuable things like gold and silver kept in other places. Coins, too, eventually became symbols of value rather than actually being worth something. The coins that were once made of silver and other precious metals are now made of combinations of inexpensive metals. The bills, checks, and credit cards that we use today are likewise representative money used because of their convenience.
What's the difference between a continent and a country?
A continent is a land mass that is generally, except in the cases of Australia and Antarctica, home to a number of countries. Continental boundaries are determined by geography rather than politics. Canada and the United States, for example, are part of the North American continent, because they occupy the same land mass, not because they share a political system. A country, on the other hand, is a defined territory that governs itself and is recognized by the international community. A country's citizens live under the rule of their government and according to the nation's laws.
How is it decided where a country will be?
Sometimes the size and shape of countries are dictated by the geography of the land around them. Mountain ranges, large bodies of water, deserts, and other features often provide natural boundaries that separate one country from another. The location of borders are often agreed upon by the countries that share them and recognized by other nations in the world. Border and territory disputes can be the source of conflict and even war between countries.
How many people are there in the world?
The ancient Romans ruled much of the known world around AD 100. There were an estimated 250 million people on Earth. It took nearly 16 centuries for that population to double, to about 500 million people. By the mid-1800s, the Industrial Revolution had brought about such improvements in living conditions, as well as in food production and distribution, that the world's population doubled again, to 1 billion people. By 1930 that number had reached 2 billion. By 2000 the number of people on Earth exceeded 6 billion. The world's population is increasing as never before, due to scientific advances in medicine and technology, and continued improvements in healthcare, living conditions, and food production around the world. Most countries no longer have the high death rates that were once unavoidable because of hunger and disease. And high birth rates continue in many parts of the world, contributing to our rapid population growth.
How many different languages are there?
There are more than 4,000 languages spoken in the world today. In some large countries, several languages are spoken. India has more than 800. In other large countries, different versions or dialects of the same language are spoken in different areas. In both cases, an official language is usually chosen for the country. That language is used in schools, by the mass media, like television, and by the government. Many languages have no written form. Tribal languages, like some spoken in Africa and Australia, for example, have been passed on orally, by word of mouth. Such unrecorded native languages often disappear when their speakers learn and use the official languages of the countries in which they live. In fact, one reason that languages like Spanish and English are spoken in so many different parts of the world is because people who spoke them conquered and colonized many foreign lands, replacing native cultures and languages with their own. For a long time people have been trying to invent a world language that everyone can speak and understand. Attempting to remove the barriers that different languages create. The best known of these is Esperanto, invented by a Polish man named Ludwig L. Zamenhof in the late 19th century. This and other international languages have not been very successful. Universal pictures, signs, and symbols have actually been the most effective way of communicating worldwide. Another way to break the language barrier is to study a second language like French or Spanish. Many people in the world know at least 2 languages very well. Such people are considered bilingual, or multilingual if they know more than 2 languages.
Which is colder, the North Pole or the South Pole?
The Antarctic, the region of the South Pole, is colder than the Arctic, the region of the North Pole. Temperatures are warmer in the Arctic because there is no huge land mass there. And the ice cover in the region sometimes breaks, allowing some of the warmth of the Arctic Ocean into the air. It's hard to think of the Arctic Ocean as warm, but it has enough thermal energy or heat to raise the air temperature several degrees. The Antarctic, on the other hand, consists almost entirely of Antarctica, a continent of 5.5 million square miles, 8.8 million square kilometers. Covered with ice, with an average thickness of 6,500 feet, or 1,982 meters. Winter temperatures in Antarctica can be some 50 degrees Fahrenheit. 10 degrees Celsius, colder than those in the Arctic.
What is the coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth?
The coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth was at the Russian research station Vostok in Antarctica on July 21, 1983. The temperature was -128.6 degrees Fahrenheit, -89.6 degrees Celsius.
What happens to old money?
Hen money gets damaged or dirty or wears out. Commercial banks send the bills to one of the Federal Reserve banks in exchange for new bills. If the Reserve Bank determines that the currency is unfit for circulation, it is destroyed. Damaged coins are returned to the Treasury. While the paper used for currency is more durable than regular paper, it is still fairly delicate and can't stay in circulation very long before getting worn out. Different bills have different lifespans. Smaller bills get handled more and therefore wear out sooner. A $1 bill, for example, usually lasts around 18 months. While a $20 bill can be in circulation for 2 years and a $100 bill for 8.5 years. A coin, naturally, lasts longer, usually around 25 years. It isn't just Federal Reserve banks that can provide new bills in exchange for old ones. Anybody who has money that is torn or damaged can take it to a local bank and get a new bill. As long as more than half of the original bill is intact. A bank should be able to provide a new bill of the same value.
Do people die when struck by lightning?
Most people struck by lightning do not die. If lightning, which is about the width of a pencil, does not pass through a person's heart, brain, or spinal cord, interrupting or damaging the electrical impulse cells that run them, then that person usually survives. While the electrical discharge of a lightning bolt is powerful and hot, up to 54,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or 30,000 degrees Celsius, it is fortunately incredibly quick. Survivors often have burn marks on their skin and clothes, especially where the lightning has entered and left their bodies. While it's possible to survive a lightning strike, it is best to follow safety precautions to avoid testing that possibility. When a thunderstorm approaches, go inside a building or closed car or truck. The vehicle's metal body will offer a safe path for lightning's electrical current to flow to the ground. The exterior of a building will do the same. One thing to remember when you are in a building, however, is to stay off a cord phone and avoid using plumbing fixtures or electrical appliances until the storm passes. Lightning can move through the ground for quite a distance from the place where it strikes, and it may on rare occasions travel along water, electrical, or phone lines into your home. If a thunderstorm approaches so quickly that you can't find shelter, you can still take steps to protect yourself outdoors. Remember that lightning always takes the shortest route to Earth, so avoid being near tall things. You may feel tempted to stand under a tall tree for protection from the rain. But remember that a tree may be struck by lightning. Don't stand on a hilltop, instead, try to find the lowest ground you can, like a ditch or a valley, and crouch there, trying to make yourself as small as possible. Avoid bodies of water, swimming pools, lakes, or even puddles. And metal objects. Both water and metal conduct electricity well. And if lightning struck them, the electrical current would travel through to everything touching the water or metal.
How are countries formed?
Often it is a group of people with something in common whose members identify with one another that makes up a country. It may be a shared race, religion, language, history, or culture that makes people feel that they belong together as a nation. Because of its uniqueness, the group feels that it should govern itself as an independent country. This feeling of shared identity and loyalty to the group is frequently behind the rise of nations. Some countries are so large and have such complicated histories of war and conquest that they are home to many different groups of people who have their own separate beliefs, languages, and customs. The differences between these groups sometimes make it difficult for them to get along. A nation is weakened by such groups if they put their own interests ahead of those of their country. But a population of many different groups can also enrich a country with diverse ideas and cultures if a spirit of acceptance and cooperation exists.
Which country has the fewest people?
Once again, Vatican City wins a smallest award, in addition to being the smallest in area. Vatican City also, not surprisingly, has the smallest population, about 850 people. The country with the second smallest population is Tuvalu, formerly called Ellis Islands. Home to fewer than 10,000 people, Tuvalu consists of a string of 9 coral atolls, which are like donut-shaped islands, rings of coral with lagoons in the center. Located in a region in the South Pacific called Polynesia.
Why are there two scales for measuring temperature?
Temperature is the amount of heat in a gas, liquid, or solid. Heat results from the kinetic energy, or rate of movement, of the molecules in objects or matter. If the molecules move slowly, the temperature is lower, and if they move quickly, the temperature is higher. Any number of different scales can be used to measure heat. All that is needed to create a scale are two reference temperatures and degrees that mark off intervals in the range of temperatures between them. In the two temperature measurement systems used most often, Celsius, also called centigrade, and Fahrenheit, the two reference points are the boiling and freezing temperatures of water. Celsius is based on the metric system, so 100 intervals or degrees separate these 2 points. Water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius and boils at 100 degrees Celsius. The Fahrenheit scale, widely used in English-speaking countries until recently and still used in the United States today, has 180 units or degrees that separate the freezing and boiling points of water, with 32 degrees Fahrenheit being the freezing point and 212 degrees Fahrenheit being the boiling point. Other temperature measurement scales include the Kelvin scale, which is used in astronomy and other sciences. One of its reference points is absolute zero, which in theory is the lowest possible temperature, the point at which molecules have no kinetic energy or heat. The Celsius, Fahrenheit, and Kelvin scales all got their names from the men who invented them. Mathematical equations can be used to convert temperature measurements from one scale to another. To convert Fahrenheit to Celsius, subtract 32 from the temperature and then divide by 1.8. To convert Celsius to Fahrenheit, multiply the temperature by 1.8 and then add 32. To convert Celsius to Kelvin, simply add 273.15 to the Celsius temperature.
Which country has the most people?
With 1.25 billion citizens. The People's Republic of China is the most populous country in the world. India ranks second, with a population of just over 1 billion.
If thunder and lightning happen at the same time, why don't we see and hear them at the same time?
Light from a flash of lightning travels almost immediately to your eyes. That is because light waves move very fast, at a speed of about 186,281 miles. 300,000 kilometers per second, a rate known as the speed of light. Sound waves, on the other hand, travel more slowly, about 1/5 of a mile, or 1,100 feet. 335 meters per second, though this varies with the temperature and medium through which sound is moving. So the sound of thunder reaches your ears a few seconds after you see lightning. Sometimes lightning is so far away that you cannot hear the thunder that goes with it. And sometimes thunder can be heard without seeing lightning, which may be hard to spot if it is deep within a cloud and the day is bright. A fairly accurate mathematical formula can indicate how far away a lightning strike has occurred. If you count the number of seconds between the flash of lightning and the sound of thunder and divide the number by 5, you will know how many miles away the lightning occurred. When thunder seems to follow lightning almost immediately, you know that lightning has struck very close by, and as the amount of time between seeing lightning and hearing thunder increases, you know the storm is moving farther away.
How do farmers keep animals from eating their crops?
Farmers keep animals away from their crops in a number of ways. Birds are probably the biggest wildlife pests because they feed on seeds before they have a chance to grow. And they eat developing food plants. Because loud noises and the presence of predators and people frighten birds. Farmers have used things like scarecrows and models of bird predators, like hawks hung from poles or trees to try to keep hungry creatures away. Devices called bird scarers, which make repeated, loud, shotgun-like bangs, are also used. But before scarers were invented, it was usually the job of farm children to stand in fields, in all kinds of weather, using wooden clappers, rattles, and other noisemakers to keep birds away from crops. Other crop enemies in the animal world are insects. Sometimes insect damage can be controlled by introducing beneficial insects that eat the bugs causing the problem. But generally farmers take stronger measures, like spraying chemical insecticides that poison the pests. Sprayers pulled by tractors are usually used, though airplanes. Crop dusters can spray a large field very quickly.
Why is mercury used in thermometers?
Mercury, the only common metal that has a liquid form at room temperature, doesn't become a solid until it reaches -38 degrees Fahrenheit, -39 degrees Celsius. Most liquids freeze in temperatures like that. Mercury doesn't boil until 611 degrees Fahrenheit, 357 degrees Celsius, and it doesn't stick to glass. So mercury is an ideal material to use in thermometers, which are often needed to record temperatures well below zero and well into the range where most liquids boil. Colored alcohol is sometimes used in thermometers, but because it boils easily, it is not good for recording high temperatures. Like all liquids, mercury expands when it is heated and contracts when it is cooled. In a thermometer, it moves up and down in a closed tube on which a scale is marked, showing the temperature of the air, liquid, or solid that surrounds it. A major disadvantage to mercury is that it is extremely poisonous. Some states in the US have banned the sale of mercury thermometers, and others are expected to follow. Mercury thermometers should be handled with care. If a thermometer breaks and mercury spills out, cleanup should be done by an adult wearing rubber gloves. The mercury beads should be scooped up with a piece of stiff cardboard and placed in a container with a lid. Anything that touched the mercury gloves, cardboard container should be sealed in 2 layers of plastic bags. A local waste disposal agency can advise on how best to dispose of the bag containing the mercury.
Which country is the largest?
Russia is the largest country in the world, with 6,592,812 square miles, 17,075,383 square kilometers, of area. It stretches across 2 continents, Europe and Asia. It is far bigger than the next largest country in the world, Canada, which has 3,851,809 square miles, 9,976,185 square kilometers, of area.
What is an iceberg?
An iceberg, a large mass of ice that floats in the sea. Usually comes from a glacier, a large mass of ice located on land, or from an ice sheet that covers a large expanse of water. Icebergs are much larger than they appear. Only about 1/10 of an iceberg shows above the water line. A fact that can cause problems for ships. A ship may steer around the visible part of an iceberg only to collide with the wide base hidden beneath the water's surface. The Titanic, a luxury ocean liner that set sail across the North Atlantic in 1912, is perhaps the most famous ship to crash into an iceberg and sink, resulting in the deaths of more than 1,500 of its passengers. Modern sonar, sound wave, and radar, radio wave equipment used during regular sea and air patrols have greatly reduced the danger of icebergs for ships today. The largest icebergs can be found in the Antarctic Ocean, near the South Pole. Some large icebergs have been known to reach heights of 328 feet, 100 meters above the water's surface, and one of the largest icebergs ever found was thought to be 170 miles. 274 kilometers, long and 25 miles, 40 kilometers, wide. The area of that iceberg nearly equals that of the state of Connecticut.
How many countries are there in the world?
There are about 191 countries in the world today. But because the political world is constantly changing, that number never stays the same for very long. For example, in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, fighting ethnic groups have declared the regions of Serbia and Montenegro separate countries. But until the United States and other nations accept their independence and national borders, the regions will not officially become countries.
How do farmers grow food?
Raising crops involves a few simple principles. Although farming has been around for about 10,000 years, a vast sweep of time in which tools and methods have changed a great deal, the basic principles remain the same. The first step in farming involves preparing the land for planting. The second step involves planting the seeds, or cuttings or seedlings. The third step involves helping the seeds to grow. The fourth step involves harvesting the mature plants and often processing them so that they can be used as food. Fruit growing and raising livestock for milk and meat are other types of farming. Preparing land for planting involves breaking up the soil with a plow. Early plows were heavy pointed sticks that people pushed through the earth. Later, the points of plows were made of iron, and their shape became broader and flatter. Plow blades are called shears. These plows sliced bigger furrows, big grooves, into the soil and flipped it over as well. While first powered by people, plows were soon designed to be pulled by animals because they had to be heavy to cut through hard ground. Usually a team of oxen or horses pulled a plow while a farmer guided and pushed it from behind. Today, powerful tractors pull plows that dig up several furrows at a time. After plowing, early farmers pulled heavy rollers and harrows, flat rake-like devices over the broken soil to make it even finer and ready for planting. Today, cultivators with rows of pointed metal prongs are pulled behind tractors to do the same job. Before planting machines, farmers sowed seeds by hand. It was a wasteful process because the wind blew seeds away as they were. Scattered and hungry birds ate them before they could be covered up by dirt. But in the early 18th century, an English farmer named Jethro Tull greatly improved the sowing process by inventing the seed drill. It was a machine that cut several grooves into the soil and then dropped small amounts of seeds held in a compartment called a hopper down tubes or chutes into the neat rows. Crops could be grown in straight lines then, which made weeding easier. Special hoeing machines were made with blades that fit between rows of crops to uproot weeds. Like a plow, the seed drill was usually pulled by horses and guided by a farmer who walked behind it. Today, of course, tractors provide the power that pulls similar sowing machines. There was not a lot that early farmers could do to help seeds grow once they were in the ground. At that point, it was really up to nature to provide the things that were needed for growth, like warmth, sunlight, and water in the right amounts. Early farmers could add natural fertilizers, like manure, to enrich soil. And they could pull weeds that competed with growing plants. They knew about the benefits of rotating crops. Growing different plants in different fields each year to keep the soil fertile and free of diseases and pests. In dry areas, early farmers even developed irrigation systems that delivered water to crops. But modern science has given today's farmers many more reliable tools to help seeds grow. Chemical insecticides, for example, kill pests that threaten crops, and selective herbicides kill weeds without damaging growing plants. Other chemicals called fungicides help eliminate plant diseases. In addition, genetically altered plants and chemical fertilizers have allowed modern farmers to grow more plants than ever before. Before modern machinery, harvesting crops was a painstaking process. Gathering and removing mature plants from the field had to be done by hand. Farm workers used sharp blade, long-handled scythes and curved sickles to cut down cereal crops like wheat. Even the fastest reaper could only clear about a third of an acre a day. Because rain could ruin harvested wheat, workers called sheaf makers quickly tied it into bundles so that it could be safely stored if the weather turned stormy. During the long winter months, farm workers used jointed wooden tools called flails to thresh or beat the dried wheat in order to separate its edible grain seeds from its stalks. But in 1786 a machine that threshed wheat by rubbing it between rollers was invented, replacing human threshers. And around 1840 a reaping machine whose revolving wheel pressed grain stalks against a sharp blade that cut them down replaced human harvesters. Today, farm machines called combine harvesters do this work in much the same way. These machines are very efficient and combine all three jobs of cutting, collecting, and threshing a crop. A single combine harvester can process 5 acres of wheat in less than an hour.
Why are there so many big trucks on the road?
The purpose of most trucks is to transport goods. Trucks carry materials and parts for manufacturing, finished goods, and food items from the places where they are produced to the places where they are needed. Everything that you see in a store got there by truck. No wonder there are so many trucks on the road. The bigger the truck, the more goods it can carry during a single trip. But for safety reasons, the length of trucks as well as the amount of weight that they are allowed to carry is often regulated. Even things produced overseas eventually make their way to you by truck. Either flown over by cargo plane or shipped by boat. The goods eventually make their way into trucks as they start their overland journey. Not too long ago, though, most goods were transported especially over long distances by railroad. Some still are. But trucks gradually took over the job as roadways expanded and improved. Trucks were preferable because they could take goods directly to their destinations while trains could only travel between stations. When you look at how many abandoned railroad yards and tracks there are around the country, it helps you realize the important role they once played in transporting goods.
Why is grass often wet in the morning even though it hasn't rained?
Floating water molecules, or water vapor, are always present in the air. The warmer the air is, the more water vapor it can hold. When air cools, it reaches a temperature at which it cannot continue to hold its moisture. This temperature is called the dew point. At this temperature water vapor will condense, becoming a liquid. At night, without the warmth of the sun, the temperature of the ground and the grass that covers it becomes cooler. If it becomes cooler than the dew point of the air that touches it, condensation will occur. The grass will be covered with droplets of water by morning. Even though no rain has fallen during the night. This moisture on the grass is called dew. And it often evaporates in the morning sunlight before we get to see it. If the temperature at night drops to below freezing, the dew will become frost. The same thing happens when the glass filled with a cold drink sweats on a warm summer day. Or when your eyeglasses fog up as you come indoors from the cold.
Why are there traffic lights?
Traffic lights were invented to control the safe flow of traffic on streets. They came into widespread use after the invention of the automobile. Until then, people generally didn't require formal traffic rules and control devices, relying instead on polite behavior and common sense when they traveled. But when fast and noisy motor vehicles began to fill the streets, it became clear that traffic control was needed. Lights that stopped some drivers, while allowing others to proceed. Was one way to protect both cars and pedestrians, people on foot, from collisions and to avoid traffic build-ups. The first traffic light was erected in 1868 in downtown London, England. This redand green-tinted gas lantern, hung on a tall iron pole, could be turned in one direction or another by a handle at its base. Of course, at the time, automobiles had not yet been invented. But the number of steam engine vehicles, animal-drawn wagons, and carriages, and pedestrians had become so plentiful at the busy corner at Parliament Square, that a traffic light was needed to prevent accidents. The electric traffic signal was invented by Garrett Morgan, an African-American businessman and inventor, in Cleveland, Ohio. After buying his first automobile, Morgan realized the need for some traffic control at intersections. He invented a traffic light based on the signals used at railroad crossings. He received a patent for it. That is, he registered the invention as his with the government. In 1923, some early traffic signals had red and green lights and a warning buzzer that sounded as the color changed. But as automobile traffic and noise increased, people thought that a visual warning between going and stopping would work better than one that was heard. An amber or yellow light was added to traffic signals to warn drivers to prepare to stop.
Why are barns usually painted red?
Paint coats wood, protecting it from sunlight and rain damage and making it last longer. When early farmers had enough money to paint their barns, they usually used inexpensive paint because the structures were so large. Ferrous oxide, a chemical powder that gives paint its red color, was readily available and cost little. Thrifty farmers in New England, New York, and the upper Midwest region painted their barns red. In those places, red barns remain a tradition. But there are plenty of barns in other parts of the country that are not red. Early farmers that were poor, especially in regions like Appalachia and the South, left their barns unpainted because they did not have the money to do the job. Unpainted wood usually weathers to a soft gray color. And in places like Pennsylvania, Maryland, and some southern Midwestern states, the most frequently seen barn color is white. Some people think that white barns grew popular when dairy farming became more important after the Civil War. White suggests cleanliness and purity, desirable qualities to be associated with milk production. Special farms where fancy horses or prize livestock were raised sometimes had barns painted unusual colors, like yellow, green, or black.
Why are barns usually painted red?
Paint coats wood, protecting it from sunlight and rain damage and making it last longer. When early farmers had enough money to paint their barns, They usually used inexpensive paint because the structures were so large. Ferrous oxide, a chemical powder that gives paint its red color, was readily available and cost little. Thrifty farmers in New England, New York, and the upper Midwest region painted their barns red. In those places, red barns remain a tradition. But there are plenty of barns in other parts of the country that are not red. Early farmers that were poor, especially in regions like Appalachia and the South, left their barns unpainted because they did not have the money to do the job. Unpainted wood usually weathers to a soft gray color. And in places like Pennsylvania, Maryland, and some southern Midwestern states, the most frequently seen barn color is white. Some people think that white barns grew popular when dairy farming became more important after the Civil War. White suggests cleanliness and purity, desirable qualities to be associated with milk production. Special farms where fancy horses or prize livestock were raised sometimes had barns painted unusual colors, like yellow, green, or black.
What is a silo?
The tall, cylinder-shaped farm structures known as silos are used to store silage, which is animal feed. Silage is moist feed made from green crops that ferment when stored in an airtight place. This fermentation process preserves the feed, which is used along with or instead of hay, dried grasses. To feed livestock like horses, cattle, and sheep during the winter when they cannot feed in green pastures. Silage gives farm animals needed nutrients. Before farmers started to raise food crops to feed their livestock. During the 18th century, they had to kill most of their animals when winter approached. Because grass in pasture lands stopped growing and the creatures faced starvation. But herds of livestock could be kept year-round once farmers began to grow crops for winter feed. Root crops like turnips, as well as leafy crops, were sometimes used. Today, corn is the crop most often used for silage.
What is a silo?
The tall, cylinder-shaped farm structures known as silos are used to store silage, which is animal feed. Silage is moist feed made from green crops that ferment when stored in an airtight place. This fermentation process preserves the feed, which is used along with or instead of hay, dried grasses. To feed livestock like horses, cattle, and sheep during the winter when they cannot feed in green pastures. Silage gives farm animals needed nutrients. Before farmers started to raise food crops to feed their livestock. During the 18th century, they had to kill most of their animals when winter approached. Because grass in pasture lands stopped growing and the creatures faced starvation. But herds of livestock could be kept year-round once farmers began to grow crops for winter feed. Root crops like turnips, as well as leafy crops, were sometimes used. Today, Corn is the crop most often used for silage.
What do farmers do in the winter?
Some farmers are lucky enough to live in places where the winters are mild and crops can be grown throughout the year. But many farmers live in regions where the winters are cold and snowy, during which time crops can't be grown. In such places, farmers usually plant crops in the spring, tend to them all summer long, and harvest them in the fall. The winter gives farmers the opportunity to do some things they may not have had time for during the busy growing and harvesting seasons. They can work on their barns or homes, repair their tractors and other machinery, and work out a plan for the following year's crops. Some farmers spend time in the winter promoting and publicizing the products they grow and sell. Many farmers find a second job off the farm during the winter to bring in some extra money. For farmers with lots of animals, or livestock, the work continues right through the winter. The animals must be fed and their pens must be cleaned. Eggs must be gathered from chicken coops and dairy cows need to be milked several times a day. Field work may be suspended for a few months during the winter, but livestock farmers keep busy year-round.
What do farmers do in the winter?
Some farmers are lucky enough to live in places where the winters are mild and crops can be grown throughout the year. But many farmers live in regions where the winters are cold and snowy, during which time crops can't be grown. In such places, farmers usually plant crops in the spring, tend to them all summer long, and harvest them in the fall. The winter gives farmers the opportunity to do some things they may not have had time for during the busy growing and harvesting seasons. They can work on their barns or homes, repair their tractors and other machinery, and work out a plan for the following year's crops. Some farmers spend time in the winter promoting and publicizing the products they grow and sell. Many farmers find a second job off the farm during the winter to bring in some extra money. For farmers with lots of animals, or livestock, the work continues right through the winter. The animals must be fed and their pens must be cleaned. Eggs must be gathered from chicken coops and dairy cows need to be milked several times a day. Field work may be suspended for a few months during the winter, but livestock farmers keep busy year-round.